The scorching summer heat of 1875 was nothing compared to the inferno engulfing the small wooden chapel on the outskirts of Redemption Creek, Texas. Inside, Dahlia Harrington's desperate screams were drowned by the roaring flames as she pounded against the locked doors, her white wedding dress now stained with soot and tears. Dahlia had always dreamed of her wedding day, but never like this. The 22-year-old had come to Redemption Creek just 3 months prior, following her father's death. With no family left in Boston and dwindling funds, she had accepted a position as the town's new schoolteacher. It was meant to be a fresh start, a chance to build a new life in the untamed frontier. Instead, she found herself trapped in a burning chapel, betrayed by the man she had trusted most. "Help, please, somebody help me," she cried, coughing as the thick smoke filled her lungs. The heat was becoming unbearable, the flames creeping ever closer. Her fingers were raw from clawing at the wooden doors that wouldn't budge. Through the small window, she could see the sunset painting the Texas sky in hues of orange and red, cruelly mimicking the fire that would soon claim her life. Just when hope seemed lost, Dahlia heard the thundering of hooves approaching the chapel. She pressed her face against the window, her eyes stinging from the smoke. "Help, I'm locked inside," she screamed, her voice hoarse. Outside, Deacon Nash pulled his horse to an abrupt halt, dust billowing around him as he took in the horrifying sight. The 30-year-old cowboy had been riding back to his ranch after a long day of work when he spotted the flames in the distance. He hadn't expected to find the town's new schoolteacher trapped inside a burning building and in a wedding dress, no less. Without a moment's hesitation, Deacon leapt from his horse and raced toward the chapel. The heat hit him like a wall as he approached the entrance, but he didn't falter. He could see Dahlia through the window, her face streaked with tears and soot. "Stand back from the door," he shouted before taking several steps back. With a running start, he slammed his boot against the wooden doors. The first kick splintered the wood, the second loosened the lock. The third sent the doors flying open, releasing a billowing cloud of smoke and heat. Dahlia stumbled forward, coughing violently, her legs buckling beneath her. Deacon caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her into his arms. The roof of the chapel groaned ominously above them. "Hold on tight," he commanded, turning and running from the building just as a burning beam crashed down where they had stood moments before. He carried her a safe distance away before setting her down gently on the ground. Her once pristine white dress was now gray with ash, and her dark hair had come loose from its elaborate arrangement. But she was alive. "Are you hurt?" Deacon asked, his voice gruff with concern. Dahlia shook her head, still coughing. "No, she broke off, watching in dismay as the chapel's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. "Everything, it's all gone." Deacon followed her gaze. "Buildings can be rebuilt, you can't." His eyes returned to her face, taking in her tear-stained cheeks and the trembling of her lips. "What happened? Who locked you in there?" Dahlia's green eyes filled with fresh tears. "Frederick, my fiancé, he found out I have no dowry, no family fortune. He said I tricked him." Her voice broke. "He left me there to die." Deacon's jaw tightened, rage building within him. Frederick Palmer was the banker's son, a man known for his ambition and cruelty. "That coward," he muttered. "Where is he now?" He said he was leaving town, taking the evening train to Dallas. Dahlia looked down at her ruined dress, her fingers trembling as she tried to brush away the soot. "I have nothing left, no job, no home, no future." "You're alive," Deacon reminded her firmly. "That's what matters, the rest can be figured out." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Night's coming. I can't leave you out here alone. My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow we'll sort things out." Dahlia hesitated, weighing her limited options. She had only spoken to Deacon Nash a handful of times since arriving in Redemption Creek. He was known as a fair employer to the men who worked his cattle ranch, but he kept to himself, rarely coming into town except for supplies. Some whispered he was running from a troubled past, while others claimed he was simply a man who preferred the company of horses to people. "I don't want to impose," she said quietly. Deacon's expression softened slightly. "It's no imposition. I've got plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, will be there. You'll be safe, I promise." The sincerity in his blue eyes convinced her. With a small nod, she accepted his offer. "Thank you, Mr. Nash." "Deacon," he corrected, helping her to her feet. "Anyone who survived what you just did has earned the right to use my first name." He led her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood patiently waiting. With gentle hands, he helped her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. Dahlia stiffened at the unexpected proximity, but as they began to ride away from the burning chapel, she found herself relaxing against his solid chest. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and Deacon's strong presence helped calm her racing heart. As they rode toward his ranch, Dahlia looked back one last time at the chapel, now a skeleton of burning timber against the night sky. The building that was supposed to mark the beginning of her new life was now nothing but ashes. Yet somehow, as the warm Texas wind dried the tears on her cheeks, she felt a strange sense of liberation. Little did she know that the man whose arms encircled her protectively as they rode would change her life far more profoundly than any wedding vows she might have spoken that day. The Nash Ranch came into view after an hour's ride through the rugged Texas landscape. In the moonlight, Dahlia could make out a sturdy two-story house built of stone and timber, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. A soft light glowed from one of the downstairs windows, indicating someone was still awake despite the late hour. As they approached, a plump older woman emerged from the house, her gray hair tucked neatly under a cap, a shotgun held cautiously in her hands. "Who goes there?" she called out, her voice strong despite her years. "It's me, Mrs. Finch," Deacon replied, reining in his horse. "And I've brought a guest who needs our help." The housekeeper lowered her shotgun, peering at them in the darkness. "Land sakes, what happened? Is that the schoolteacher?" Deacon dismounted before helping Dahlia down from the horse. Her legs trembled beneath her and she swayed slightly, exhaustion and shock finally catching up to her. "Miss Harrington was trapped in a burning chapel," Deacon explained, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Frederick Palmer locked her inside and left her to die, Mrs." Finch gasped, hurrying forward to take Dahlia's arm. "You poor dear, come inside this instant. You need a hot bath and clean clothes." She shot Deacon a significant look. "And I expect you'll be paying a visit to Mr. Palmer soon. He's supposedly on a train to Dallas by now," Deacon replied grimly. "But I'll make sure justice is served one way or another." Mrs. Finch nodded in approval before turning her attention back to Dahlia. "Let's get you inside, dear. You're safe now." The interior of the Nash home was surprisingly comfortable and well-appointed. Polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and colorful quilts created a warm, inviting atmosphere that Dahlia hadn't expected from the solitary rancher. "This is beautiful," she murmured, taking in the spacious main room with its stone fireplace. "Mr. Nash might not care much for town life, but he knows how to make a proper home," Mrs. Finch said proudly, guiding Dahlia toward the stairs. "Now, let's get you cleaned up and settled. I'll prepare the guest room and draw a bath," while Mrs. Finch bustled about. Deacon remained downstairs, his expression troubled as he poured himself a small glass of whiskey. The sight of Dahlia trapped in that burning chapel had stirred something within him, memories he'd spent years trying to forget. Upstairs, Dahlia sank gratefully into the warm bathwater Mrs. Finch had prepared, wincing as it touched the minor burns and scratches on her arms and legs. As she washed away the soot and ash, she allowed herself to finally process what had happened. Frederick Palmer had courted her almost immediately after her arrival in Redemption Creek. Handsome and charming, he had seemed like a blessing, a chance at security, and perhaps even happiness in this new place. When he proposed after just 2 months, Dahlia had hesitated, but his promises of a good life and her own precarious situation had convinced her to accept. She had been honest about her circumstances from the beginning, telling him that her father's death had left her with little more than the clothes on her back and her education. Frederick had claimed it didn't matter, that her beauty and refinement were enough. But today, hours before their wedding, he had confronted her, accusing her of deceiving him about her financial situation. "You're nothing but a penniless opportunist," he had spat, his handsome face twisted with contempt. "Did you really think I would tie myself to someone with nothing to offer but pretty smiles and empty pockets?" When she had arrived at the chapel early to prepare for the ceremony, Frederick was waiting. Before she could react, he had pushed her inside and barred the doors from the outside. Then he had set fire to the building, his final words to her still ringing in her ears. "Consider this my wedding gift to you, a spectacular end to your deceitful ways." A quiet knock at the bathroom door interrupted her dark thoughts. "Miss Harrington." "I've left some clean clothes on the bed for you," Mrs. Finch called. "They belonged to Mr. Nash's sister, but she left them behind when she moved east with her husband. They should fit you well enough for now." "Thank you, Mrs. Finch," Dahlia replied, grateful for the woman's kindness. After drying herself and dressing in the simple blue cotton dress Mrs. Finch had provided, Dahlia made her way downstairs. She found Deacon standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames with a troubled expression. "Mr. Nash, Deacon," she corrected herself when he looked up. "I wanted to thank you properly. You saved my life tonight." He set down his glass and straightened. "Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't anyone, it was you." Dahlia moved closer, the firelight illuminating her still damp hair and the delicate features of her face. "I owe you everything," Deacon shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Harrington." "Dahlia," she insisted softly. "If I'm to call you Deacon, then you must call me Dahlia." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Dahlia, then, Mrs." Finch appeared in the doorway, interrupting the moment. "Supper's ready, though it's just some warmed-up stew and biscuits at this hour. Miss Harrington needs to eat something before she rests." Over the simple but hearty meal, Dahlia learned more about her rescuer. Deacon Nash had come to Texas 10 years earlier, after the Civil War had claimed his family's farm in Tennessee. He'd worked as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy his own land 5 years ago. Now, at 30, he ran one of the most successful cattle operations in the county, though he employed only a handful of men and preferred to do much of the work himself. "And you've never married?" Dahlia asked, immediately regretting her boldness. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "It's a fair question," Deacon replied, his expression neutral. "No, I've never married. My work keeps me busy, and I've never met a woman willing to put up with a man who spends more time with cattle than people." Mrs. Finch snorted. "That's because you never give any woman a chance. Too busy brooding and working yourself to the bone." Deacon shot his housekeeper an exasperated look, but there was affection in it. "Mrs. Finch has appointed herself my personal matchmaker, despite my protests." "Someone needs to look after your future," the older woman retorted. "You need a wife and children to pass this ranch on to." An awkward silence fell, broken only when Dahlia stifled a yawn behind her hand. "You're exhausted," Deacon observed. "You should rest. We can figure out what comes next in the morning." Dahlia nodded gratefully, allowing Mrs. Finch to show her to the guest room. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt and curtains that fluttered in the warm night breeze. "Sleep well, dear," Mrs. Finch said, patting her hand. "You're safe here." Left alone, Dahlia sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind replaying the day's events. Hours earlier, she had been preparing to become Mrs. Frederick Palmer. Now, her would-be husband was fleeing town after attempting to murder her, and she was sleeping under the roof of a man who had been little more than a stranger until he'd kicked down a chapel door to save her life. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw flames, felt the suffocating heat, heard Frederick's cruel laughter as he left her to die. After an hour of tossing and turning, she rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. In the distance, she could make out a figure sitting on the porch steps of what appeared to be the bunkhouse. Even from this distance, she recognized Deacon's broad shoulders and the distinctive silhouette of his hat. He wasn't alone in his sleeplessness, it seemed. The following morning, Dahlia awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes, grateful that Mrs. Finch had also provided a brush for her tangled hair. When she descended the stairs, she found Deacon already at the table, his sleeves rolled up as he studied a ledger. He looked up at her approach, his blue eyes assessing. "You look better this morning," he commented, setting aside his work. "How did you sleep?" "Well enough, thank you," she lied, not wanting to burden him with her nightmares. "Is Mrs. Finch in the kitchen? I'd like to help with breakfast." "She'd probably chase you out with a wooden spoon for suggesting it," Deacon said with a small smile. "Mrs. Finch guards her kitchen like a mother bear protects her cubs." As if summoned by their conversation, the housekeeper appeared with a tray of food, eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. "Sit and eat, both of you," she instructed. "Miss Harrington, you need your strength after what you've been through." "And you, Mr. Nash, have a long day ahead." Dahlia accepted a plate gratefully. "What are your plans for today?" she asked Deacon. He hesitated, exchanging a glance with Mrs. Finch. "I'm riding into town to speak with Sheriff Wilson about what happened. Frederick Palmer needs to answer for what he did to you." "Do you think the sheriff will believe me?" Dahlia asked quietly. "Frederick's father is an influential man in Redemption Creek. The evidence is clear enough: a burned chapel and the testimony of a respected schoolteacher," Deacon replied firmly. "Besides, I found something last night when I went back to check if the fire had spread." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver pocket watch. "This was on the ground near the chapel steps. It has Frederick Palmer's initials engraved on it. He must have dropped it while setting the fire." Dahlia stared at the watch, a chill running through her despite the warm morning. He always carried that. "It was a gift from his father when he turned 21. It's proof he was there," Deacon said, returning the watch to his pocket. "Sheriff Wilson is a fair man. He won't ignore evidence like this, no matter who Palmer's father is." "What about me?" Dahlia asked, setting down her fork. "I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely. You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Deacon assured her. "In fact, I've been thinking. The school term doesn't start for another month, correct?" Dahlia nodded, wondering where he was going with this. "Mrs. Finch's niece was supposed to come help around the ranch this summer, but she's expecting a child and can't travel. We could use an extra pair of hands, nothing too strenuous, just helping with meals for the ranch hands, perhaps some mending, keeping the accounts in order. I'd pay you a fair wage and you'd have a safe place to stay until the school term begins." Dahlia blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job. It would benefit us both," Deacon said pragmatically. "You need somewhere to stay and I need help around the ranch. Mrs. Finch isn't getting any younger, though she'd box my ears for saying so." The housekeeper snorted but didn't contradict him. Dahlia considered the offer. It was generous and would solve her immediate problems. The alternative was returning to town, where she would face pity, gossip, and possibly even suspicion. Some might not believe her account of what Frederick had done. "I accept," she said finally, "and I'm very grateful, but I insist on earning my keep. I won't be a charity case." Deacon nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. "Good, it's settled then. After breakfast, I'll head into town. Is there anything you need from your boarding house?" "My books and clothing," Dahlia replied, "and my mother's locket. It's all I have left of her." "I'll bring them back," Deacon promised, rising from the table. "In the meantime, Mrs. Finch can show you around the ranch." After he had ridden away, Mrs. Finch gave Dahlia a tour of the property. The Nash Ranch was larger than she had realized, encompassing thousands of acres of grazing land for the cattle, as well as fields where they grew hay and other crops to sustain the animals through winter. Besides the main house and bunkhouse, there was a barn, stables, a smokehouse, and a small kitchen garden that Mrs. Finch tended personally. "Mr. Nash built most of it himself," the housekeeper explained proudly as they walked. "Started with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than any man I've ever known." "You've known him a long time?" Dahlia asked, curious about the man who had saved her life. "Since he first came to Texas, barely more than a boy with haunted eyes and calloused hands. My husband and I owned a small farm nearby. When Jacob passed 5 years ago, Mr. Nash offered me a position here." Mrs. Finch's eyes softened with memory. "He's a good man, Miss Harrington, the kind that doesn't come along often in these parts." I'm beginning to see that, Dahlia replied thoughtfully. They spent the morning in the kitchen, preparing a midday meal for the ranch hands who would come in from the fields hungry and tired. Dahlia found the work satisfying, kneading bread dough, chopping vegetables, learning Mrs. Finch's recipes that the men favored. When the ranch hands filed in for their meal, they were surprised to see Dahlia but greeted her politely. There were only 5 of them: Miguel, the foreman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a quick smile; the Henderson brothers, Tom and Sam, barely out of their teens but skilled with horses; Illy, a former slave from Louisiana who managed the ranch's finances alongside his other duties; and Charlie, an older cowboy with a face weathered by decades under the Texas sun. "The boss told us what happened, Miss Harrington," Miguel said as they ate. "We're all mighty glad he found you in time." "So am I," Dahlia replied with a small smile. "And please call me Dahlia. I'll be helping around the ranch until the school term begins." "The boss said you're to be treated with the utmost respect," Charlie added, his voice gruff but kind. "Not that we needed telling. Any man who do what Palmer did to you deserves to swing." Dahlia flinched slightly at the blunt words, and Mrs. Finch shot Charlie a warning look. "What Mr. Watson means," Illy interjected smoothly, "is that we're all appalled by what happened and will ensure you feel safe and welcome here." The meal continued with lighter conversation, the men sharing stories about life on the ranch and asking Dahlia about her journey from Boston. She found herself relaxing in their company, their straightforward manner and obvious respect for Deacon easing her lingering anxiety. It was late afternoon when Deacon returned, his expression grim as he dismounted from his horse. Dahlia, who had been hanging laundry with Mrs. Finch, felt her heart sink at the sight of his troubled face. "What happened?" she asked as he approached, dreading the answer. "Frederick Palmer left town yesterday evening, just as he told you," Deacon confirmed, removing his hat. "But his father claims he was headed for San Antonio, not Dallas. Sheriff Wilson has sent telegrams to both cities alerting the authorities to watch for him." "They believe me then?" Dahlia asked, hope rising within her. "They do. The evidence is clear, and Palmer's hasty departure only confirms his guilt." Deacon hesitated before continuing. "There's more. When I spoke with Mrs. Jenkins at your boarding house, she mentioned that Palmer had been asking questions about your background, specifically whether you had any family money. This was weeks ago, long before the wedding plans." Dahlia's hands tightened on the damp sheet she was holding. "He was investigating me. It seems he always intended to marry for money," Deacon said grimly. "When he confirmed you had none, he decided to eliminate what he saw as a problem." Tears pricked at Dahlia's eyes, not for the loss of Frederick's love, which she now realized had never existed, but for her own naivety. "I was such a fool." "No," Deacon said firmly, stepping closer. "You trusted someone who presented himself as trustworthy. The fault lies entirely with him, not you." Mrs. Finch, who had been listening silently, nodded in agreement. "The only fool in this situation is Frederick Palmer, thinking he could get away with such evil." Deacon reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle. "I brought your things from the boarding house. Mrs. Jenkins sends her regards and says your position at the school is secure. The school board met this morning and unanimously agreed that recent events have no bearing on your ability to teach." Relief washed over Dahlia. Her job was safe, at least. "Thank you for doing this," she said, accepting the bundle of her possessions. "There's one more thing," Deacon added, his expression softening slightly. "I spoke with Reverend Thomas. The congregation is already making plans to rebuild the chapel. He asked me to tell you that when it's finished, they hope you'll consider it a place of new beginnings, not painful memories." The kindness of the gesture brought fresh tears to Dahlia's eyes. "That's very thoughtful of them." "People in Redemption Creek take care of their own," Deacon said simply. "And like it or not, you're one of us now." With that, he excused himself to check on the cattle, leaving Dahlia to ponder his words, "one of us." For someone who had spent the last few months feeling like an outsider, those 3 words carried more weight than Deacon could possibly know. Over the next 2 weeks, Dahlia settled into life at the Nash ranch. The days developed a comfortable rhythm, rising with the sun, preparing meals with Mrs. Finch, mending clothes and keeping the ranch's ledgers in order. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, she often sat on the porch, reading or simply enjoying the spectacular Texas sunsets. Deacon was frequently busy with the demands of the ranch, but she noticed he made a point of joining her for meals whenever possible. Their conversations, initially stilted and polite, gradually became more natural. She discovered he was well-read despite his limited formal education, with a particular interest in history and a surprising knowledge of poetry. "My mother taught school before she married," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "She made sure my sister and I had books, even when there was little else to spare." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Dahlia said, wondering what had happened to Deacon's family. He rarely spoke of his past. "She was," he agreed, a hint of old grief in his voice. "She would have liked you another strong-minded woman who values education." Dahlia smiled at the compliment. "And your sister, the one whose clothes I've been wearing?" Elizabeth lives in St. Louis now with her husband and their children. She writes regularly, always trying to convince me to visit. A fond smile crossed his face. "Maybe someday." "Why don't you?" Dahlia asked curiously. "Visit them, I mean." Deacon was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The ranch demands most of my time," he finally said, though Dahlia sensed there was more to it than that, "and I've never been one for city living." Before she could probe further, the sound of approaching hooves interrupted their conversation. Deacon rose to his feet, instantly alert, one hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, moving down the porch steps to meet the rider. In the fading light, Dahlia recognized Sheriff Wilson, his badge glinting as he dismounted and greeted Deacon with a handshake. "Evening, Nash. Miss Harrington," the sheriff called, tipping his hat in Dahlia's direction. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," Deacon replied. "What brings you out this way?" "News about Palmer," the sheriff said, his expression serious. "Mind if I come up and sit a spell? Been a long ride." Deacon nodded, leading the sheriff up to the porch. Mrs. Finch, sensing a visitor, appeared with a tray of coffee and her famous apple pie, which the sheriff accepted gratefully. "We found Palmer," Sheriff Wilson announced after taking a fortifying sip of coffee. Or rather, the authorities in San Antonio did. "He was attempting to board a ship bound for Mexico." Dahlia's heart raced. "They arrested him." "They did. He's being transported back to Redemption Creek as we speak." The sheriff's weathered face was grim. He denied everything at first, claimed he had no idea how the fire started. But when they showed him the pocket watch and mentioned your testimony, he changed his tune. Started saying it was all a misunderstanding, that he'd only meant to scare you, not harm you. "That's a lie," Dahlia said, her voice stronger than she expected. "He told me it was his wedding gift, a spectacular end to my deceitful ways." Those were his exact words. Sheriff Wilson nodded. "I believe you, Miss Harrington, so will the judge. Palmer will face trial for attempted murder, and with the evidence we have, I expect he'll be spending a very long time behind bars." Relief and a strange sense of closure washed over Dahlia. Frederick would face justice for what he had done. The nightmare wasn't over, but an end was in sight. "When will the trial be?" Deacon asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. 2 weeks from now. Judge Parker will be coming through on his circuit." The sheriff turned to Dahlia. "You'll need to testify, Miss Harrington. I know it won't be easy, but your account is crucial." "I'll be there," Dahlia assured him, though the thought of facing Frederick again made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I'll accompany her," Deacon added, his tone making it clear this wasn't open for discussion. Sheriff Wilson smiled slightly, his eyes moving between Deacon and Dahlia with knowing perception. "Figured as much. Well, I should be heading back to town, just wanted to deliver the news in person." After the sheriff had departed, a heavy silence fell between Deacon and Dahlia. The prospect of the trial had brought back all the fear and pain she had been trying to put behind her. "You don't have to face this alone," Deacon said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I'll be right there with you." Dahlia looked up at him, gratitude and something deeper stirring within her. Why are you doing all this for me? You barely knew me before that night. Deacon's blue eyes held hers, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. Maybe because I know what it's like to watch everything you care about go up in flames and be powerless to stop it. The raw pain in his voice made Dahlia reach out instinctively, her hand covering his where it rested on the porch railing. What happened to you, Deacon? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice low and measured, he began to speak. During the war, I was away fighting for the Union. My family stayed on our farm in Tennessee. Confederate soldiers came through our area, taking what they wanted, burning what they couldn't use. His hand tightened under hers. My parents and youngest brother were inside our home when they set it on fire. A neighbor tried to help them, but it was too late. Oh, Deacon, Dahlia whispered, horror and sympathy flooding through her. Elizabeth was the only one who survived because she was visiting a friend in the next county. He took a deep breath. When I came home after the war ended, there was nothing left, just ashes and memories. Now Dahlia understood why he had reacted so strongly to finding her trapped in the burning chapel, why he had been so determined to help her rebuild her life. That's why you came to Texas, to start over, he nodded. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by ghosts. Elizabeth married soon after and I headed west, figured I'd either find a new life or die trying. I'm glad you found a new life, Dahlia said softly, and I'm grateful that you were there to save mine. Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, an unspoken connection forming between them. Dahlia felt something shift in the air, a possibility that hadn't existed before this moment. But Deacon broke the spell, gently withdrawing his hand from beneath hers. It's getting late. You should rest. Tomorrow will be another busy day. As Dahlia prepared for bed that night, she found her thoughts continually returning to Deacon. The stoic rancher who rarely revealed his feelings had shared his deepest pain with her. She understood now why he kept people at a distance, why he had built this isolated kingdom of cattle and land. It was his fortress against further loss, yet he had opened his home to her, risked reopening his own wounds to help her heal from hers. The realization sent a warm current through her body, a feeling she was hesitant to name but couldn't deny. Sleep came easier that night than it had since the fire. When she dreamed, it wasn't of flames and locked doors, but of strong arms carrying her to safety and blue eyes that held understanding beyond words. The day of Frederick Palmer's trial arrived with an unseasonably cool morning, as if even the Texas summer was holding its breath in anticipation. Dahlia dressed carefully in her best dress, one of her own that Deacon had retrieved from her boarding house, and pinned her dark hair in a simple but elegant style. When she descended the stairs, she found Deacon waiting in the main room, dressed in a clean shirt and his best trousers, his usually untamed hair combed neatly back. You look nice, he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Thank you, Dahlia replied, touched by the compliment. So do you. Mrs. Finch bustled in, insisting they eat a proper breakfast before the long day ahead. Can't face a trial on an empty stomach, she declared, setting plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before them. The ride into town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Redemption Creek, Dahlia felt her anxiety rising. The town seemed unusually busy, people gathering in small groups, their conversations hushed as Deacon and Dahlia rode past. Seems like the whole county has turned out for this, Deacon observed grimly. Is that normal for a trial? Dahlia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. For one this significant? Yes, Palmer's father is an important man, and what his son did, it's not something people will forget easily. The trial was being held in the town hall, the largest building in Redemption Creek now that the chapel was gone. When they arrived, Sheriff Wilson was waiting outside, his expression serious. Miss Harrington, Mr. Nash, he greeted them. Everything's ready. The judge arrived last night. Palmer is being held in the jail cell until it's time for him to appear. Will I have to see him? Dahlia asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Yes, but he'll be under guard the entire time, the sheriff assured her. He can't hurt you anymore. Deacon's hand came to rest supportively at the small of her back. "I'll be right beside you," he promised quietly. Inside, the town hall was packed with spectators. Dahlia recognized many faces, parents of her students, shopkeepers she patronized, neighbors from her boarding house. Some offered sympathetic smiles, while others watched with undisguised curiosity. Judge Parker, a stern-faced man with a reputation for fairness, called the court to order. The proceedings began with the reading of the charges against Frederick Palmer: attempted murder, arson, and false imprisonment. When Frederick was led in, flanked by deputies, Dahlia's breath caught in her throat. He looked thinner than she remembered, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled. When his eyes met hers across the room, she saw nothing of the man she had once agreed to marry, only a cold, calculating stranger. The prosecutor, a young lawyer from the county seat, presented the evidence methodically. The pocket watch found at the scene, testimonies from witnesses who had seen Frederick near the chapel shortly before the fire began, and finally, the statements of Sheriff Wilson regarding Frederick's attempted flight to Mexico. Then it was Dahlia's turn to testify. As she took the stand, she felt a momentary panic, her eyes seeking Deacon's in the crowd. He nodded encouragingly, his steady gaze giving her the strength to proceed. In a clear, unwavering voice, she recounted everything: Frederick's courtship, his proposal, his discovery that she had no fortune, and finally, the horrifying moments when he had locked her in the chapel and set it ablaze. "He told me it was his wedding gift to me," she concluded, her voice remarkably steady, "a spectacular end to what he called my deceitful ways." A murmur ran through the courtroom at her words. Judge Parker called for order before turning to Frederick's lawyer, a slick-looking man hired by the elder Palmer. "Your witness, Mr. Holloway." The defense attorney approached, his smile predatory. "Miss Harrington, you claim my client locked you in the chapel and deliberately set it on fire, correct?" "I don't claim it, sir. It's what happened," Dahlia replied firmly. "Yet there were no witnesses to this alleged act, were there? No one saw him lock me inside, if that's what you're asking." "So we have only your word that my client intended to harm you," the lawyer pressed. "Perhaps this was all a terrible accident. Perhaps you were confused in your distress." Anger flashed through Dahlia. "I was not confused when Frederick Palmer told me I deserved to die for supposedly deceiving him. I was not confused when he locked the doors from the outside and told me to consider the fire his wedding gift." Mr. Holloway's smile faltered slightly. "My client admits there was an argument, Miss Harrington. He admits he was upset when he learned you had misrepresented your financial situation." "Objection," the prosecutor interjected. "Miss Harrington never misrepresented anything. She was forthright about her circumstances from the beginning." "Sustained," Judge Parker ruled, fixing the defense attorney with a stern look. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Holloway." The cross-examination continued, with the lawyer trying to paint Dahlia as a fortune hunter who had fabricated the attempted murder story when jilted. But Dahlia remained composed, answering each insinuation with dignity and truth. When Frederick took the stand, his version of events was markedly different. He claimed there had been an argument, yes, but that he had left Dahlia at the chapel to collect her thoughts. The fire, he insisted, must have been an accident, perhaps a candle left burning. "And your hasty departure from town?" the prosecutor asked during cross-examination. "Your attempt to flee to Mexico, were those actions consistent with an innocent man?" Frederick's facade cracked slightly. "I panicked. I knew how it would look." "It looks like attempted murder, Mr. Palmer," the prosecutor said bluntly, "because that's exactly what it was." The final witness was Deacon. As he took the stand, his eyes briefly met Dahlia's, and she saw in them a determination that steadied her racing heart. Deacon described finding the chapel in flames, hearing Dahlia's cries for help, and breaking down the doors to rescue her. His testimony was straightforward but powerful, particularly when he produced the pocket watch he had found. "This was lying on the ground near the chapel steps," he stated, handing it to Judge Parker. "It has Frederick Palmer's initials engraved on the back. He must have dropped it while setting the fire or fleeing afterward." Frederick's face paled as he recognized the damning evidence. His father, sitting in the front row, looked away in disgust. After all the testimony had been heard, the judge took only a brief recess before returning with his verdict. The town hall fell silent as Judge Parker cleared his throat. "Frederick Palmer, this court finds you guilty of attempted murder, arson, and false imprisonment. These crimes are particularly heinous given the breach of trust involved. You sought to end the life of a woman who had agreed to be your wife." Dahlia felt tears of relief gathering in her eyes. Beside her, Deacon squeezed her hand gently. "I sentence you to 20 years in the state penitentiary," Judge Parker continued, his voice ringing with authority. "May God have mercy on your soul." As Frederick was led away, his face a mask of shock and rage, Dahlia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. It was over. Justice had been served. She could truly begin to rebuild her life now. Outside the town hall, people approached to offer their support and sympathy. The mayor assured her that her position at the school was secure. Mrs. Jenkins from the boarding house told her that her room would be waiting whenever she wished to return. Through it all, Deacon remained at her side, a solid, reassuring presence. When the crowd finally dispersed, he turned to her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Dahlia nodded, surprised to find it was true. "Yes, I think I am. For the first time since the fire, I feel like I can breathe again. Would you like to go back to the ranch, or do you want to stay in town for a while?" The question carried implications beyond the immediate decision. Was she ready to return to her life in Redemption Creek, or did she still need the sanctuary of the Nash Ranch? "Let's go home," Dahlia said, the words slipping out naturally. "To the ranch, I mean," she corrected quickly, feeling a flush creep up her cheeks. A small smile played at the corners of Deacon's mouth. "Home it is, then." As they rode back to the ranch together, Dahlia felt something shifting between them, a new awareness, a possibility that had been growing steadily since the night he had saved her from the burning chapel. The summer days stretched languidly on, each one bringing subtle changes to Dahlia's relationship with Deacon. They began spending more time together, not just at meals or in the evenings, but throughout the day. Deacon started inviting her to ride with him to check on the cattle or inspect the fences. He taught her to ride properly, not side saddle as she had learned in Boston, but astride like a true Texas woman. "You're a natural," he told her one afternoon as they galloped across an open meadow, the wind whipping her hair free from its pins. "Most city women never adapt to riding this way." Dahlia laughed, exhilaration coursing through her veins. "Most city women never have to escape a burning building or testify against a would-be murderer either. I'm learning to adapt to all sorts of things." Something warm flickered in Deacon's eyes at her words. "Yes, you are. You're stronger than you know, Dahlia Harrington." The compliment settled in her chest like a glowing ember. She was discovering a resilience within herself that she hadn't known existed, and it felt good to have it recognized by someone whose opinion she valued. As August approached, bringing with it the start of the school term, Dahlia found herself increasingly reluctant to leave the ranch. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life there, the early mornings, the honest work, the simple pleasures of a meal shared with people who had become like family. More than that, she had grown accustomed to Deacon's presence in her daily life. Their conversations had deepened over the weeks, moving beyond polite exchanges to genuine sharing of thoughts, beliefs, and dreams. She learned that beneath his reserved exterior was a man of principle and passion, someone who cared deeply about his land, his animals, and the people who depended on him. One evening, about a week before school was set to begin, they sat together on the porch as they often did. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, a spectacle that never failed to take Dahlia's breath away. "I'll miss this view when I return to town," she said softly, a note of regret in her voice. Deacon was silent for a long moment, his profile strong against the fading light. "You don't have to go," he finally said, his voice low. Dahlia turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze, and in his blue eyes she saw a vulnerability he rarely allowed others to glimpse. "I mean that I've grown accustomed to having you here, Dahlia. The ranch feels different with you in it better, somehow." "Deacon," she began, uncertain how to respond to the unexpected admission. You could stay, he continued, the words coming faster now as if he feared losing his courage. Ride into town each day for school and return here in the evenings. Or if that's too impractical, I could drive you in the wagon myself. Hope bloomed in Dahlia's chest, but she needed clarity. Are you offering me continued employment? As your housekeeper's assistant? Deacon shook his head, a hint of frustration crossing his features. No, that's not, he broke off, running a hand through his hair. I'm not expressing myself well. He rose from his chair and moved to stand before her, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Taking a deep breath, he spoke again, his voice steadier now. I'm asking you to consider making your home here permanently, Dahlia. Not as an employee, but as someone who belongs here, with me. Dahlia's breath caught in her throat. Are you proposing, Deacon Nash? A small, rueful smile crossed his face. I suppose I am, though I'm making a poor job of it. I never expected to feel this way again, to want to share my life with someone. After losing my family, I thought it safer to keep people at a distance. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. But then you came into my life, or rather, I kicked down a door and you came into my arms, and somehow, without my noticing it happening, you became essential to me. Tears of joy welled in Dahlia's eyes. When did you know? She whispered. I think part of me knew the moment I carried you from that burning chapel, Deacon admitted. But I didn't allow myself to acknowledge it until the trial, when I saw your courage in facing Palmer. I realized then that I didn't just admire you or want to protect you, I loved you. Oh, Deacon, Dahlia murmured, her heart overflowing with emotion. I've been falling in love with you too, day by day. Your kindness, your strength, the way you rebuilt your life after such terrible loss, how could I not love you? His eyes lit with hope. Then you'll marry me. You'll make this ranch your home and me the happiest man in Texas. In answer, Dahlia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as Deacon's arms encircled her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other. I'll take that as a yes, Deacon said, a new lightness in his voice. Dahlia laughed, joy bubbling up within her. Yes, Deacon Nash, I will marry you and make this ranch our home. From the doorway came the sound of sniffling. They turned to see Mrs. Finch standing there, wiping her eyes with her apron. About time, the housekeeper declared, her voice thick with emotion. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the smokehouse together to make you see sense. Deacon chuckled, rising to his feet and pulling Dahlia up with him. No need for such drastic measures, Mrs. Finch. It seems we found our way to sense on our own. Well, thank the Lord for that, Mrs. Finch replied, beaming at them. This calls for celebration. I'll make my special peach cobbler. As the housekeeper hurried back to her kitchen, Deacon turned to Dahlia, his expression suddenly serious. There's something important we need to discuss, he said, leading her back to their chairs. Your experience with Palmer, I want you to be absolutely certain about this decision. I'm not a wealthy man like he pretended to be. The ranch does well enough, but there will be lean years and hard times ahead. Deacon, Dahlia interrupted gently, I'm not marrying you for financial security. I'm marrying you because I love you, because when I look at you, I see my future, my happiness. The tension eased from his shoulders. I just wanted to be sure, after what you've been through. What I've been through has taught me to value honesty and goodness above all else, Dahlia said firmly. You've shown me both from the moment you kicked down that chapel door, Deacon smiled, the last of his doubts vanishing. Speaking of the chapel, Reverend Thomas mentioned it should be completed by October. Would you consider being married there? It might help replace the bad memories with good ones. The suggestion touched Dahlia deeply. I think that would be perfect, a new beginning in every sense. October it is then, Deacon agreed, lifting her hand to his lips. Though I warn you, Mrs. Finch will insist on a proper celebration. She's been planning my wedding in her head for years, despite my protests that I wasn't the marrying kind. Dahlia laughed. And now, he said, his voice dropping to a gentle murmur, I can't imagine anything I want more than to make you my wife. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Redemption Creek. To Dahlia's surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The townspeople seemed to view their relationship as a fitting resolution to the tragedy that had nearly claimed her life, a phoenix rising from the ashes. As Reverend Thomas put it in his Sunday sermon, the school board, rather than objecting to their teacher's impending marriage, expressed delight. Several of the board members' wives even formed a committee to help with wedding preparations, eager to ensure that Dahlia's second trip to the altar would be a joyous one. September brought the start of the school term, and with it, a new routine. True to his word, Deacon drove Dahlia into town each morning in the wagon, returning to collect her in the afternoon. The arrangement worked well, allowing her to fulfill her teaching duties while still making her home at the ranch. Her students, curious about the dramatic events of the summer, peppered her with questions on the first day. Dahlia answered them honestly but simply, explaining that sometimes people make bad choices out of greed or anger, but that justice had prevailed. When little Mary Stevens asked if Mr. Nash was her knight in shining armor, Dahlia couldn't help but smile. "Something like that," she replied, thinking of how Deacon would scoff at such a romantic characterization. Yet in many ways it was true. He had saved her life and offered her a future when she thought all hope was lost. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the completion of the new chapel. It was larger than the original, built of sturdy stone rather than wood, with beautiful stained glass windows donated by grateful parishioners. Reverend Thomas invited Dahlia and Deacon to be the first to tour the finished building. Standing in the center aisle, Dahlia felt a momentary flash of memory smoke, heat, the terror of being trapped. But then Deacon's hand found hers, his touch anchoring her to the present. "Are you all right?" He asked quietly, concern in his eyes. Dahlia nodded, looking around at the sunlight streaming through the colorful windows, the polished wooden pews, the altar adorned with autumn flowers. "Yes, it's beautiful, nothing like before. I think it will be perfect for our wedding." Reverend Thomas beamed at them. "The chapel has risen anew, just as your life has, Miss Harrington. I can think of no more fitting first ceremony than one celebrating love and new beginnings." The wedding was set for the third Saturday in October. As the day approached, the ranch became a flurry of activity. Mrs. Finch oversaw preparations with military precision, ensuring everything would be perfect for her children, as she had taken to calling Deacon and Dahlia. Elizabeth, Deacon's sister, arrived from St. Louis with her husband and children, bringing with her a sense of family that had been missing from the ranch for too long. She embraced Dahlia warmly, declaring that she had always known her brother would need a woman of exceptional character to break through that thick skull of his. The night before the wedding, as Dahlia sat brushing her hair in her room, soon to be their room, a soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Finch with last-minute instructions. Instead, it was Elizabeth who entered, carrying a small wooden box. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "but there's something I wanted to give you before tomorrow." She opened the box, revealing a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "This belonged to our mother. Deacon doesn't know I brought it. He's always insisted I should keep the few family heirlooms we have. But I think Mother would want you to have this to wear on your wedding day." Dahlia's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the precious gift. "Elizabeth, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Elizabeth replied, squeezing her hand. "Just know that by loving my brother, you've already given our family more than you could possibly understand. I haven't seen him this happy since before the war." After Elizabeth left, Dahlia carefully opened the locket. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of a handsome couple, Deacon's parents, she realized. The resemblance between father and son was striking. She closed the locket and held it to her heart, feeling a connection to the family that had shaped the man she loved. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the Texas sky a perfect blue. Dahlia, dressed in her new gown, ivory satin with delicate lace trim, made by the town's seamstress with fabric ordered specially from Dallas. Around her neck she wore Elizabeth's gift, the silver locket nestled against her collarbone. Mrs. Jenkins from the boarding house helped arrange her hair, weaving autumn flowers into the dark tresses. "You look absolutely radiant, my dear," the older woman said, stepping back to admire her work. Mr. Nash won't know what hit him. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Miguel, who had offered to escort Dahlia to the chapel in the absence of her father. The ranch foreman looked uncharacteristically formal in his best suit, his usually casual manner replaced by solemn dignity. "Miss Harrington," he said, offering his arm, "it would be my honor to walk you down the aisle today." "Thank you, Miguel," Dahlia replied, touched by the gesture, "and after today you'll have to start calling me Mrs. Nash." The man's face broke into a wide smile. "That will be my pleasure, Senora." The chapel was filled to capacity when they arrived. It seemed the entire population of Redemption Creek had turned out for the occasion. As the first notes of music filled the air, Dahlia took a deep breath, memories of her last visit to a chapel flashing briefly through her mind. But then the doors opened, and she saw a deacon waiting at the altar, tall and handsome in his new suit, his blue eyes fixed on her with such love and wonder that all shadows of the past vanished instantly. This was not the same chapel, not the same man, not the same future. This was the beginning of a new life, one she had chosen with her whole heart. As Miguel led her down the aisle, Dahlia's eyes never left Deacon's. When they reached the altar, the foreman placed her hand in his employer's with a respectful nod before taking his seat. "You're beautiful," Deacon whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "So are you," Dahlia whispered back, bringing a smile to his lips. Reverend Thomas began the ceremony, his words echoing through the new chapel, sanctifying the space with promises of love and commitment. When it came time for the vows, Deacon spoke with uncharacteristic openness, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "Dahlia Harrington, when I found you in that burning chapel, I thought I was saving your life. I didn't realize you would end up saving mine. Before you, I existed but didn't truly live. You've brought light and purpose back into my world, and I promise to spend the rest of my days ensuring you never regret choosing to share your life with me." Tears shimmered in Dahlia's eyes as she responded. "Deacon Nash, you didn't just rescue me from the fire. You showed me what real love looks like, not in grand gestures or pretty words, but in daily kindness, unwavering support, and honest affection. I promise to walk by your side through whatever life brings us, grateful every day for the second chance we've been given." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Deacon didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He gathered Dahlia in his arms and kissed her with such tender passion that several of the women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes, and a few of the men cleared their throats gruffly. The celebration that followed at the ranch was unlike anything Redemption Creek had seen in years. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, a small band played lively tunes, and lanterns hung from trees created a magical atmosphere as evening fell. Dahlia and Deacon moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone from the mayor to the youngest ranch hand. "Mrs. Nash," Deacon murmured during a quiet moment, savoring the sound of her new name, "are you happy?" Dahlia looked up at her husband, her heart full to bursting. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "Are you?" His answer was to draw her close and kiss her again, heedless of the cheers and good-natured teasing from the guests. When they parted, his eyes held a promise that sent a thrill of anticipation through her. "The happiest man in Texas," he confirmed, "just as I predicted." As the celebration continued around them, Dahlia found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had arrived in Redemption Creek alone and uncertain, seeking nothing more than a modest living as a schoolteacher. She could never have foreseen the danger she would face, the betrayal she would endure, or the love she would find in the aftermath. Looking up at her husband, Dahlia realized that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures. If Frederick hadn't locked her in that burning chapel, if Deacon hadn't ridden by at that precise moment, if he hadn't had the courage to kick down those doors, none of this would have been possible. Perhaps, she thought, as Deacon led her to the center of the yard for their first dance as husband and wife, that was the nature of life on the frontier. Danger and opportunity walked hand in hand, and those who survived the former were rewarded with the latter. As they moved together under the Texas stars, surrounded by friends who had become family, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be in the arms of the man who had not just saved her life, but had given her a reason to truly live it. 5 years later, the Nash Ranch had prospered beyond what either Deacon or Dahlia could have imagined on their wedding day. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, first with the arrival of their son, Thomas, named after Reverend Thomas who had married them, and then their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Deacon's sister. Dahlia continued teaching at the Redemption Creek School, now taking 3-year-old Thomas with her each day, while baby Elizabeth remained at the ranch with Mrs. Finch. The arrangement worked perfectly, allowing Dahlia to pursue her passion for education while still being very much involved in the running of the ranch. Deacon had expanded their cattle operation, implementing new breeding techniques he'd learned from agricultural journals Dahlia ordered from back east. Their partnership extended beyond marriage and parenthood to a true business collaboration, with Dahlia's organizational skills and education complementing Deacon's practical experience and vision. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset as they had so many times before. Thomas played nearby with wooden horses Deacon had carved for him, while Elizabeth slept peacefully in her mother's arms. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Dahlia asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "If you hadn't ridden by the chapel that day," Deacon's arm tightened around her waist. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path." "Nor can I," Dahlia agreed, gazing out at the land that had become home, "though I still have nightmares occasionally about being trapped about the fire." "I know," Deacon said softly. He was a light sleeper and had often held her through those nightmares, whispering reassurances until her breathing calmed. "But they're less frequent now," Dahlia nodded. "They are, and when I wake from them, I'm no longer afraid, because I know you're there." "I always will be," Deacon promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. They were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Miguel rode up, his expression serious as he dismounted. "Mr. Nash, Mrs. Nash," he greeted them. "Sorry to disturb your evening, but there's news from town." "What is it, Miguel?" Deacon asked, straightening. "Frederick Palmer has been released from prison," the foreman said bluntly. "Sheriff Wilson sent word. Apparently he got time off for good behavior." Dahlia felt a chill run through her despite the warm evening. After only 5 years. "He was sentenced to 20. Miguel shrugged apologetically. "The sheriff said the prison was overcrowded and Palmer had connections. His father pulled some strings." Deacon's face hardened. "Has he returned to Redemption Creek?" "No, sir. Last the sheriff heard, he was headed for California. Said there was nothing left for him here." Relief washed over Dahlia. "Thank you for letting us know, Miguel." After the foreman had departed, Deacon turned to Dahlia, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She considered the question honestly. The news of Frederick's release had unsettled her, but not as deeply as it once might have. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm not the same woman he tried to destroy. I'm stronger now, and my life is full in ways he could never understand." Pride shone in Deacon's eyes. "You're the strongest person I know, Dahlia Nash. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I have you to protect me. The man who kicked down a burning chapel door wouldn't hesitate to do whatever was necessary if Frederick ever showed his face here." "That's a fact," Deacon agreed firmly. "But I don't think we'll ever see him again. He knows what would happen if he came back." Thomas looked up from his play, sensing the serious tone of their conversation. "Papa, what's wrong?" Deacon scooped up his son, settling him on his hip. "Nothing to worry about, partner, just grown-up talk." The little boy accepted this explanation, his attention already shifting to a hawk circling in the distance. "Look, like the one you showed me yesterday." As Deacon engaged their son in conversation about birds of prey, Dahlia found herself marveling at how completely her life had transformed. The frightened, desperate woman in that burning chapel seemed like someone from another lifetime, a ghost of a past she had long since outgrown. That night, after the children were asleep, Dahlia and Deacon sat before the fireplace in their bedroom, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. It was their time to talk, to plan, to simply be together without the distractions of ranch work or parenting. "I've been thinking," Deacon said, his fingers idly stroking Dahlia's hair as she leaned against him. "Maybe it's time we took that trip to St. Louis to visit Elizabeth. The children are old enough to travel now, and it would do us all good to get away for a while." Dahlia looked up at him in surprise. In 5 years of marriage, Deacon had always found reasons to postpone visiting his sister, preferring that she come to them instead. "What changed your mind?" He was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Hearing about Palmer today reminded me that life is unpredictable. We shouldn't put off the things that matter." "I think it's a wonderful idea," Dahlia said, touched by his reasoning. "Thomas would love the steamboat journey, and Elizabeth has been begging to meet her niece and nephew in person." "Then it's settled," Deacon decided. "We'll go in the spring, when the weather is milder for traveling." As they continued to discuss the details of their planned journey, Dahlia reflected on how far they had both come from the wounded souls they had been when they first met. Deacon had learned to open his heart again, to embrace family and connection rather than holding himself apart out of fear of loss. And she had discovered a resilience and courage within herself that had transformed her from victim to survivor to a woman fully in command of her own destiny. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting a warm glow over the room they shared. Outside, the vast Texas sky was alive with stars, witnesses to the love and life they had built from the ashes of tragedy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to grow together. But for tonight, they were content to simply be husband and wife, partners in every sense, their story still unfolding with each passing day. As Dahlia drifted towards sleep in her husband's arms, she thought again of that fateful day when a burning chapel and a courageous cowboy had changed the course of her life. What had begun as her darkest hour had led her to her greatest happiness, a truth she would carry in her heart through all the years to come. "I love you, Deacon Nash," she whispered, her voice soft in the quiet room. "And I love you, Dahlia Nash," he replied, holding her close as they slipped into dreams not of fire and fear, but of the bright future that stretched endlessly before them, as vast and promising as the Texas horizon at dawn.